in order for all of this to work, we'll be asking folks from YouTube to come over to Volya Radio here, and asking Volya Radio folks to join YouTube, to join indications and warnings, and to let others know the simulcast is taking place. This is basically a bullet points. We're going to review maps. We're going to go right along the front line. We'll talk about what is happening and what Ukraine's response to the massive attack last night, overnight. What will Ukraine do to respond? So just let me say, as we approach time for the simulcast to begin, it is about 11:30 in Kyiv right now. And so it is 9:30 in London, 4:30 here on the East Coast of North America, 1:30 out west. And those are all the timestamps we need today, May 14, which is the 1,541st day of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. I am going to bring up our first speaker. Look forward to hearing, Mark, what you have to say.
Hey, Alan, thank you. And as always, thank you, folks, for hosting the space. I kind of had a question for Heather in regards to the having enough House members to vote for Ukraine, bring up the vote for Ukraine. I just want to hear what your take is I know they have enough votes, enough people signed on to bring it to a vote. What's your feel for once it comes to the floor for a vote? Do you think they'll have enough votes in the House and the Senate?
Sadly, I haven't been keeping track of that. I apologize, Mark. I know that they got enough signatures on the discharge petition to bring it forward, but I have not tracked to see if they have enough votes to get it totally done. Alan may know, Will may know, we may have somebody who knows, but I apologize. I don't know what the chances of that actually passing are at this point.
Yeah, sure. Understandable. I mean, you've always seemed to be very, very busy. Ellen, because you're simulcasting on YouTube, is profanity allowed?
Well, that's a good question. I'm going to say no profanity. We're going to try to keep this family friendly from the beginning to end today. But
all right.
So Mark, just keep that profane thought in your head.
Just for Jenny's sake, you know what to do with Russia, right? So, Jenny, yeah. Thank you.
We do. It is great that the 218th signature came through in the House. And this means that at precisely the right moment, when maybe the tide of war is turning in Ukraine's favor, maybe the United States once again will begin to act as an ally of Ukraine. And that will be thanks to action in Congress. And it will be thanks to both Republicans and Democrats, but especially the Republicans in the House. That bill has an excellent chance of passing. And because of, I guess I'd say, other problems that President Trump has, I don't think he's going to veto it. And we don't know, Chuck, exactly how much would get appropriated. But, there's $400 million that Congress appropriated last year. That's just been released for use to go to military aid in for Ukraine. We still have Pearl, but unfortunately, all those weapons purchases that European nations have made through Pearl, which was set up especially to help Ukraine, they paid for the weapons, but the weapons are not being delivered, and in some cases, they're being diverted to the Middle East.
Yeah, that is definitely one of the problems here, and especially because, as you said, the transactions get made, but the deliveries don't. And I normally stay away from American politics because all I'm going to do is step on the third rail. But it's amazing to me how the negotiations for these last votes are going to come down to things like who gets a new post office or who gets a new overpass on their highway. And they often don't have anything to do with Congress post office or men and women doing the right thing. We got a little feedback, but that's okay. There's always voices in my head.
It's temporary. It was my fault.
Listen, you never know what's going to pop up in my head. But again, we hope that these actually get there. I am happy for every nickel that we can get into Ukraine. But in the world of weapons and war, $400 million isn't really a whole lot of stuff.
It's not. And given what Ukraine needs continuously for air defense, it's a drop in the bucket.
And later we'll be talking today. Necessity has thrust upon Ukraine the necessity to develop new things, and in lieu of the air defense systems that the United States was supposed to provide, right down to the lower end of the threshold, Stingers and antiquated but still lethal Hawk missile batteries, to pack missiles for the Patriot air defense systems. Ukraine has had to come up with electronic warfare solutions, and we'll be talking later when we get into the numbers for this latest missile attack. But the debut of the revelation of Ukraine's Lima electronic warfare system, which might just be the most sophisticated and powerful system in use anywhere in the world. And attention, Raytheon, somebody cut your groove there, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, this is, I think we will be talking about Lima and electronic warfare. I mean, it's, as we always say here, it's one thing to talk about drones, but the flip side of the coin is electronic warfare. They go together. And that's why every drone team deployed by Ukraine has a team practicing electronic warfare as well, because they have to stop those Russian drones trying to search out, hunt down the Ukrainian drone operators wherever they may be. It's changed war. It's also changed command and control throughout the military.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've said this a lot. In my day, it was aircraft carrier battle groups that had electronic warfare, or it was corps level and army level and, division levels. So tens of thousands of troops, they deserved an electronic warfare capability. $4 billion aircraft carriers, they had electronic warfare capability. But now it is literally below the squad level. Fire team, operators in fire teams, 4-man groups, they have electronic warfare. And just put up something today, a very interesting new development that L3 Harris Tech, which they also make televisions, but they've created a software patch that can be put into the radios that are already in the field. So you've got a radio that you can talk to your squad and platoon and company level communications, but this thing will also warn you while you're using your radio that there's a drone, hostile drone in the vicinity. That sounds like that's cool, but that's really like magic. No new hardware, no new pack, no new bot, just right on your download it on your phone, literally put it in the handset, and you're good to go.
This is also why the battlefield in Ukraine is probably more dangerous for Chuck and me, especially. We are such technological idiots. I'll be honest with you. I mean, the fact that we are here on both YouTube at Indications and Warnings and with our Volya Radio folks on Twitter has nothing to do with Chuck and me. It has everything to do with our producer, Thomas.
Yeah. Alan and I, listen, Will had to take us through getting our Ukrainian phones. Okay. I mean, it was pathetic. There were second graders getting phones there, and they knew more than we did. So.
And Chuck, you know who is with us from Ukraine right now is Will. Although he hasn't raised his hand, I'm going to kick him in the ass and say, come on up and say something.
Yeah, Will, come on. We were just, good thing I wasn't telling the other Will story that I have. No, Will is a good one. He's a great guy. We dig him.
Will, go ahead. Well, let's see. I can't hear Will.
Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out which one is ahead. Which is the YouTube a little bit ahead, or is the phone a little bit? Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out which one is ahead.
Mute the YouTube.
YouTube a little bit ahead, or is the phone a little bit? Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out which one is ahead.
Mute the YouTube.
YouTube a little bit ahead. Right. I'm just a little bit. Right. I'm just a little bit. So, Chuck, I've got a question for you. Given the fact that we're talking about air defense here, obviously in Ukraine, we've got a huge. Given the fact that we're talking about air defense, I don't know. So, my question is, I heard Dennis Stillerman talking today about the possibility of them getting into anti-ballistic missiles. And the issue is that they're going to base the anti-ballistic missile system that they've got with some electronics and systems, computer systems from Saab and other European countries, but they're going to base it on their FP7 missile that they're developing, which I find a little bit problematic. And I was wondering your priority concern here, because mine was that Ukraine has been weathering the storm with regard to ballistics and drones like we did the last couple of nights here. And although I would like to see more shoot downs of ballistics, the numbers of them seem relatively less significant than the damage that could be done by producing large quantities of FP7s in the standard, like a TACMS analog thing mode, and using those on the Iskander, S-400, and the other short-range ballistic missile launchers with time on target information. And we know those things can't move that quickly. Do you think that Ukraine has enough satellite intelligence information outside of what the States is providing, that if they had 100, say, FP7s, would it not possibly be a better use of those, rather than using them in an anti-ballistic missile role, to use them to kill the launchers as soon as they launch, and we have time on target information for them, kill the archer rather than shoot the arrows down? Because anti-ballistics is such a hard target, is such a hard role for defense in air anti-air defense.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there that the thing to do is actually thump the launcher, and they can't move that quickly. And and I can look at it this way. I've got a projectile, and I can either shoot it straight up in the air and hope that I hit a bullet with a bullet, or I can lob it over at a launch platform that I know cannot just pull up its stabilizers and zoom off at 45 miles an hour. So I agree with you there. I think I have a report coming out on the Kyiv Post about the Lima system, and there's a meld of kills that soft kills and hard kills that Ukraine is able to put on incoming Russian threats, and the hard kills being you actually intercept something. You either hit it with you hit it with a drone, you hit it with a missile that's either fired by an F-16 or ground fired, Stinger man pads hitting a passing Shahed. But the Lima system, I was very surprised over the last couple of months. It actually interdicted 58 of 59 incoming Kinzhal missiles, which is the hypersonic variant of the Iskander, dropped, as you know, by a MiG-31. And it is hypersonic only to the extent that it goes Mach 10, right? So it's not hypersonic in the manner that the United States is working on a platform that can maneuver in flight. And the Kinzhals are actually vulnerable because they are going so fast. The Lima system communicates to them that they're off target, and the Kinzhal's guidance tells it to do a maneuver that it can't sustain. So if you're going Mach 10 and you try to turn, you're going to put 20, 30, 40, 60, 70, 100 Gs on the missile body, and it flies apart. So that's a very long way to get around to completely agreeing with you that I think thumping Russian air defense and, of course, Russian ballistic missile launch platforms, that's much more, you've got a higher chance of succeeding and less consequence probably if you miss.
And the science is much more, as you say, developed and well known, right?
Yeah, I truly think so. I was really surprised that I wasn't surprised that Ukraine had been operating Lima for about a year without telling anybody. But, when those numbers came out on the Kinzhal, I was truly surprised. We'll get into the numbers of the most recent attack, but they are, Russia will send, this attack was even bigger than this, but Russia will generally send, 400 to 600 Shaheeds, 200 decoys. And when those are fully engaged by Ukraine air defense, then they launch the short range ballistic missiles, or in some cases longer range ballistic missiles, and also the KH-101s and the Caliber cruise missiles. So, and again, folks, Russia is aiming at city centers, apartment buildings.
Chuck, and for listeners at Volya Radio, just take a look up into the nest for those statistics about this massive attack that Russia launched. It wasn't only massive, it was also, it went on for almost 2 full days continuously.
Yeah, Will, how was that? You are there. How was it?
It was. So I was far out in the west. I was in Ivano-Frankivsk. We had 3 Shaheds that made it to the city over a period of about an hour, with one coming in relatively early and made its way down toward the airport. But I hate to tell you this, I was watching from the top of a building, it made some black smoke and didn't appear to do much damage. The second one was shot down coming into the west of the city, over before it reached the river and the power plant on the west of Ivano-Frankivsk. It looked to have been shot down. The air defense gun-based systems, I think, took that out. There was a fair bit of anti-aircraft fire at that point in time. And the third one passed through everything, and the anti-aircraft fired, but it didn't take it down. And it was coming in at about maybe 200 meters off the ground, and then just dove right in toward the center of the city, maybe 5 or 6 blocks south of Renox Square there. And they could try to make the claim that they were firing at an SBU building that is in a stone's throw or two from where that building is. But they came in from the totally wrong direction to try to hit that building, and they basically just went into the side of an apartment building. And I was looking for the big explosion. It was one of the thermobarics, but a big explosion because it blew up on the outside of the apartment. Right? If those things don't make it inside the apartment, their effectiveness is significantly reduced. So it did some damage to a number of the units in there, but no initial reports of injuries. So that's not it's not a huge attack, but three Shaheds is $120,000, and I don't reckon that would have done $120,000 worth of damage. So this is what I mean. These attacks on civilians, they're terror attacks, but they're not particularly effective terror attacks. They certainly scare the little kids in places where they don't happen very often. So they've got to be stopped. But militarily, they're doing nothing, and even the ballistics, which are phenomenally terrifying and generate a much larger boom. But if you're aiming those for the center of a city and they use Lima or some other spoofing method on them, they're not going to be effective at hitting anything really with any accuracy. So this is why I hate to say that I'm not that worried about the missile barrages and Shahed barrages because they do need to be stopped, but their effectiveness is so low that I would prefer focusing on the Votkinsk missile factory again. If you want to stop the ballistics, hit that Votkinsk missile factory again. If you want to stop the Shaheds, go after Yellow Buga. We all know. I mean, we've analyzed in detail exactly which buildings they need to hit inside there. So I think that's what I would focus on if I was Ukraine.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And folks, by the way, Will is a really good targeteer. If you have a petroleum, oil, and lubricant facility to hit, Will is your guy. But we're talking about hard kills and soft kills here, Will. So in the last attack, as it was coming, even scanning the OSINT thing, many people were predicting the information was out that the Tu-95s were getting loaded up. As incredible as this seems, folks, the Russians still use the exact same frequencies radio frequencies to communicate with their Tu-95s. And there are ham radio operators and radio freaks all around the world, and they notice bombing mission that the Tu-95s are being communicated with. So there is a warning cycle which aids Ukrainian civil defense. But of the attack last night, we talked about generally, or over the last couple of days, I mentioned 400 Shaheds, 200 dedicated decoys. Well, this last attack, there were 1,567 drones launched, of which 1,473 were shot down. So that is, that's pretty much a 94% kill ratio against the Shaheds. And ballistic missiles were, at the low end of the medium interception rate, which is still 73%. The problem is if you're diverting one of those missiles, you need to really divert it because they're as we all know, they're literally aimed at apartment blocks. So if you only divert it a couple hundred meters, it's still going to come down in somebody's back garden. But, I love the idea that Putin is buying Shaheds from Iran, who's cashing the checks, and you know, only 10% of the drones he buys actually get through to target, and that's good.
Well, I'm also going to just put up into the nest here on Twitter over at Volya Radio today's dashboard by Ragnar Gudmundsson, which I recommend to everyone because it has daily updates of exactly the kind that Chuck just provided. And I also have a couple of questions, Chuck, from our YouTube listeners. Let's see if I can actually read them. What I really need is my pair of binoculars. Here's a question from one of our YouTube viewers. Is our defense industry dragging its feet because they have billions invested in overpriced defense systems when Ukraine's tech does it for the price of a Big Mac?
Well, I think those, a good point of reference here is if you squirt a Javelin missile at a tank, you're spending about $270,000 to kill that tank. And the Ukrainians can do that for about $1,600. But I think that, the military industrial complex in the United States, it's kind of retarded by two things. One of them is the consumer side, and one of them is the production side. So I've spoken before about doing some projects for DARPA. And you get in there, and I've mentioned this a million times, but it bears repeating. If I had come in 10 years ago and said, look, here's a DJI Mavic drone. I use this for skiing and filming myself snowboarding. If I tape a RPG warhead to this, it'll kill a tank. DARPA would just kind of shine me on. And as the papers go around, they tend to be shared with, so you have a young, hot idea. It gets shared with the old grumpy guys on the corner. And believe it or not, they're going to, maneuver that idea into a cul-de-sac and strangle it. Basically because, hey, we have a $270,000 solution for that problem. Who is this idiot? Right? So the whole apparatus in the United States moves slowly. But I think this first 21st century war has shown a lot of people, and especially the U.S. military. Now, I haven't said the industrial military complex yet, but the U.S. military realizes that the economies of scale here and the rapid prototyping and the development of new technology, that we have to embrace a Ukrainian model now. You have to listen to good ideas in the field, Alan, and do what Ukraine does. Let's get that out in the field and see how it works.
We're going to go back to Will Teal for a follow-up. And as we do, I also want to say what underlines the need to listen to Ukrainians and to watch everything that they are doing, not only on the battlefield, but in their defense manufacturing sector. Every time they are invited to participate in a NATO training exercise, it just happened in Sweden, okay? A single team of Ukrainian drone pilots and EW operators defeats NATO. I mean, absolutely crushes them to such an extent that they have to pause the training exercise. I mean, Chuck, that is amazing. On my way to Ukraine, I want to stop at one of these NATO training exercises and see how they do it.
We used to call that you'd be in an exercise, and then we'd say, we're going to go admin here for a minute. We're going administrative, which literally meant what you said. We are getting our asses kicked so bad, let's reset this. And I do want to say this, that more than anything else is going to help to move the needle. Because when you go on an exercise, you're supposed to show what you can do. For example, in a SEAL platoon, and we're operating against a target that's being guarded by the Ohio National Guard, right? If I go there and get my butt kicked by a National Guard unit, I'm out. So I think Sweden will move on this information and see. if you're 20 minutes in to a 3-day exercise and you have to reset because we've all been killed. So, but I hope they'll do it. And you know what? Sweden is fertile ground. Remember, they were neutrally armed with their own technology for years, and they are smart cookies. And I think they're going to get the message.
And their Gripen fighter jets will be going to Ukraine sometime soon. So let's go back to Will Teal from Volya Radio. And then I have an additional question from a viewer at Indications and Warnings. Will, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Alan. So my next question is, in the last couple of weeks, we've really seen these mid-range drones start to do some serious damage all the way down to Mariupol, operated by Azov, and they are these Hornets drones and these are the ones that have been partially developed with Mr. Schmidt from Google, who's been over working on the semi-autonomous mid-range drones. They've got the full suite now of FP1s, FP2s, Hornets, even the long-range things. Smokey, one of our co-hosts, did some analysis the last couple of days and estimated that for the people they've got, for Russia has the soldiers in Crimea and southern Kherson, that those 60,000 troops would need about 8,600 tons of bullets, beans, water, and ammunition every day or every week, with fire control over both the railroad down through Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and the highway now on all the way to Mariupol being under fire. Does that number 8,600 tons a week sound reasonable to you for supply of 60,000 folks? And are we then not this summer potentially looking at isolating Crimea to the point where it's untenable for Russia to stay there? Is that something that might be realistic this summer?
Boy, I hate to say this summer, but the ground war vector down there, of course, as we all know, is crossing the Dnipro River. That's always a big, both logistic event, and of course, you have X number of crossing points. That means X number of targets. You want to establish the preconditions necessary for your offensive operation. I'm going to throw all these little nuggets out there so we can get our arms around it. Kherson, south of the Dnipro, is one of the rear areas for Russia. And they are concentrating on the areas from Kamiansky, Orkiv, Huliopol, Pokrovsk, Konstantinivka. I'm hitting these things as they go up. The contact line is about 1,000 kilometers long, a little longer. But so Russia is moving their forces by necessity to these more active theaters, but that leaves Crimea vulnerable, as Will, you were just pointing out. And there are only 2 roads, as Will also pointed out, going into Crimea from the north. The M14, which is what Will was talking about, and the M17. Again, as we also mentioned, you might as well think of Crimea as an island, because there are only those 2 crossing points from the north. You can't build any more roads. They're going across a great big swamp and bayous and lakes, etc. I just don't know if the time is going to be right for that. I think Russia will be in a lot worse condition after their summer offensive, considering that their spring offensive did nothing to establish their preconditions. But there's the one thing that I always worry about whenever we talk about an offensive operation staged by Ukraine, Will, is what happened to Ukraine's very successful invasion of Kursk Oblast. Washington pulled the plug on Ukraine's intelligence, and that allowed a North Korean reinforced Russian offensive operation to push Ukraine out of Kursk. And the only thing that
Yeah,
permitted
I'm not really thinking though, Chuck, about an offensive operation. I'm just wondering, can they possibly starve them out?
Yeah. And the short answer to that is yes, absolutely. Here's the other good thing. When you talk about the M14 coming down into Crimea, they are going 300 extra miles because they can't get those logistics. They're not willing to risk them on the Kerch Bridge, which has diminished vehicle and especially diminished train capacity. Formerly, that stuff came in moving on rail barges or, rail transport ships, but Ukraine has sunk all three of those. One of them they sunk right at pierside. So it doesn't matter if they get a new ship; they have to take this huge ship out of the rail junction. So yeah, will absolutely. And those vehicles are not just vulnerable when they come in on the M14 and turn south into Crimea. That whole ground line of communication is coming increasingly under the thumb of Ukraine. And that brings you back to your first question. Do you take those FPs and use them as anti-ballistic missiles, or do you use them to clobber Russian logistics? And I say clobber the logistics.
Will, you're getting a shout out from a viewer at Indications and Warnings on YouTube. Will Teal is a great guest. This is coming from an ATP politics host. So don't let that go to your head, though, Will. Here's another question from a viewer at Indications and Warnings on YouTube, and it, in a way, it's going to set up some map analysis that will be coming up here. But let's see, I can't quite make out his name. You can see that I need 2 or 3 pairs of glasses as well as 2 or 3 computers. This is from. It's a good question. And it's a question that would occur to anyone looking at Chuck's maps. Why are Ukrainians leaving their cover to go through no man's land? If Russians are coming at them, why not send the drones and stay put unless they get close? So, I think generally the Ukrainians are waiting for Russians to patrol, to contact. They are not going out to seek contact with the Russians, except, maybe around Kamiansky. I don't know.
Yeah, but there has been some terrain changing hands, and the way that, you have to physically occupy the terrain. I think that what Ukraine is pretty good at is deciding when you want to do the easy thing, which is to be on defense and get your binoculars and wait for the Russians to show up literally bumper to bumper, or you have some poor sap who is so badly trained he walks across the middle of an agricultural field either in daylight or walks across it at night without any thermal protection. But there are situations going right now in Geopolitical where the Ukrainians are actually moving south. And around Orhiv as well, I'm looking at the Kamiansky map, which I guess was from yesterday. And the Ukrainians are moving there as well. One of the things that happens is the Ukrainians, we talked about preconditions for offensive operations. The Ukrainians are going to look out there. This process goes like that. They look out over this field, they run the reconnaissance, and they find out where the 3 or 4 Russian positions are. Often, a dilapidated barn, and the 2 or 3 Russians are in the root cellar. You blow those guys up, you monitor the radio, you've got the Russian communications net, that position Charlie, Delta, and Echo are not responding anymore, so you move forward, right? So, and Ukraine cares a lot about their casualty levels. So these are not done, in the Russian command net, it's, keep advancing and don't tell me how many body bags you need.
I think overall, it's been estimated that the ratio of Russian casualties to Ukrainian casualties is 5-1. But in some places on the zero line, it's 6, 7, or even 8 or 9-1, and it just depends on where you are and what the Russian strategy is and how the Ukrainians decide to meet it.
Yeah, and there are cases, for example, just recently south of Konstantinivka, where a Russian armored column was beaten up. They weren't totally destroyed, but they lost several tanks and, half a dozen infantry fighting vehicles. And in those sorts of contexts, Ukraine loses no one because the whole engagement is prosecuted by drones.
Right, which is amazing. And I mean, this is why we can go back months and how you adapted your phrase, never send a soldier where you can send a grenade. The updated advice from Chuck is never send a soldier where you can send a drone. Ukraine can send more drones in more places than the Russians, because Ukraine has also made many more advances and innovations in developing ground drones or ground robots. I mean, I hope everybody has seen the news of Ukrainian ground robots taking Russians prisoner and also assaulting Russian positions and overwhelming them without a single Ukrainian infantry soldier involved, all drones.
Well, there was something that was talked about previously, and I mean before the war, so 5 years ago. A certain military capability was talked about more by philosophers and moral theologists than the military, and that was what happens when you create a device that goes out and looks for the enemy and does so totally autonomously. It searches targets on its own, no human in the loop, and prosecutes them. Well, that is happening now in Ukraine. Ukraine literally puts up these drones operating, this is not their words, but my words. We used to have things called kill boxes. If you were in there, you were a bad guy. And this thing goes up and it looks for heat, it looks for movement, it has its own parameters, and it'll close on a target and kill it by itself. Like I said, that was philosophers talking about whether or not we should do it. Now we're doing it. Believe me, I'm sitting here in health and safety. But you look at how important that capability will be, because it is a software upgrade to existing platforms. And Ukraine puts 10,000 of those things in the air every day. And by the middle of the summer, it's going to be 20,000 of them every day. One more fact, 95% of Russians on the battlefield are killed or wounded by Ukrainian drones. So it's over to you, philosophers. Let's hear what you have to say about that.
Well, here's a very good and apropos question from a viewer at Indications and Warnings on YouTube. And just to remind folks, both listening and watching, this is a simulcast with Volya Radio on Twitter. You can go to Spotify and look for the Volya Radio archive on Spotify. You will find this show there, but you will find hundreds of other Volya Radio broadcasts, including broadcasts with Natty Raymond, for example, who's the lead investigator into Russia's abduction of Ukrainian children. And if you run a couple of windows on your computer or if you're watching this on your phone, stop by Volya Radio on Twitter. There are some excellent fundraising opportunities for all of us who support Ukraine. So here is a question coming from Grunge Thing, and thanks Grunge Thing over at Indications and Warnings on YouTube. Are the Russians changing tactics because they are learning, or because they are running out of gear, or both? It's a good question.
Turn myself off there. That is a wonderful question, and it truly is both. You know, the principal tactical change, that adaptation that Russia has made, is that it relies much more on these small groups of infiltrators rather than you know, combined arms, mechanized ground maneuver warfare. And that is because, first of all, every time they put together a tactical element, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, uh, artillery forward deployed so it may support these operations, the Ukrainians detect these movements and they hammer all these assets. They blow up the tanks and the infantry fighting vehicles at the assembly points, or more often they wait till they get into column, which is absolutely, you know, suicidal. But the Russians are compelled to do that because of the mine density in the battle areas. And again, Ukraine, as you know, on the defense, they have the advantage of being able to throw these mines out there. The Russians have a couple things not going right for them. Ukraine places mines out there, and they do what you're supposed to do. It's supposed to be a minefield. So you know where all the mines are, so that when you want to maneuver yourself, you can you know, go to the places and dig them up. The Russians, on the other hand, literally have these machines where you stack up mines like clay pigeons at a skeet range, and it just flings them willy-nilly. Well, that's great to keep people from crossing that. I'm not going to call it a minefield, that heap o' mines, but it's Russia themselves that, as the dynamics of the front line change, Russia has all of these mines scattered around the terrain that they're trying to operate in. But, you know, they don't care, because if you're a Vatnik, you're a consumable. Okay, so the one other thing that's going on, why doesn't Russia use this mechanized advanced techniques more often? They're running out of tanks, right? They've lost 11,000, almost 12,000 tanks. It's either 20 or 40,000 infantry fighting vehicles. You know, they just don't have it. They're running on fumes. And I'm still a long war guy, but this may be the last summer, Alan.
And if this is the last summer, then we are probably heading into the last winter. That would be my hope.
I would tend to agree with that.
And so just to keep things going, I will return to Volya Radio questioners. Please be patient for just one moment, because here's a really great question from Sergeant Hulk at Indications and Warnings on YouTube. And it's fascinating. It's just, there's so much thought behind this question, Chuck. And it's directed to you, as it should be. Chuck, how close do you think we are to seeing a ground drone probing to contact engagement with air cover by FPV, with ISR support for artillery to add as required, so no humans at this point of contact? I mean, here is a guy thinking through the new tactics you need to integrate with drones saturating the battlefield today.
Very thoughtful question, obviously by someone with a little bit of training here. You know, I think we may already be seeing it. Right now, we know that there are drones that are patrolling a patrol box and, you know, they're cleared hot. They're fire and forget. Guy throws it up, he doesn't even have to look through this, you know. So they'd throw 10 of those drones up, and the guy's got his screen broken up into all these little things, and he's sitting there drinking a cup of coffee, watching these things hunt. All right. And you just talked about the drones, you know, patrolling to contact. Well, it was about 4 or 5 months ago that Russian APC was coming down a road. I was going to comment on the quality of Russian armored personnel carriers, but a ground drone with a good old 50 caliber machine gun, a weapon, by the way, that's 100 years old, still very effective, still, in use. But that 50 cal chewed up that Russian infantry fighting vehicle, which, by the way, that shows how bad their armor is. If a 50 caliber can go through it, that's pretty bad. That wasn't an autonomous intercept, but there were no Ukrainians within 700-800 meters of that contact. And I like where you're going with the ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance drones overhead. And I don't think it's a big leap from having drones that can go out and hunt, prosecute targets, to having another drone that is, that its algorithms are just what the questioner could add, right? You're going to get up here, you're going to look at the hotspots, you're going to communicate to the artillery, you're going to have them fire, you're going to make them shoot and scoot. So I love that question, and I love where you're going. So thank you for that great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. And, you were talking about what some people have called low air dominance. And so that is dominance over the battlefield that FPV drones provide, basically, this low air dominance. It's going to become key.
Yeah, and you also look at this, in terms of where the Buck Rogers is going. In my day, look, I said this before, in my long career, the first time I have ever been attacked from the air was in Odessa, right? I have never had anybody shoot at me from the air in my life. So you have the Russian Air Force, and it still dominates the Ukrainian Air Force. And by the way, it's a generational process to build up an Air Force. You're not going to just get 100 new F-16s and dominate. It's an institutional building process. But we look at that, the drones and the variety of drones that can do all sorts of things. And, it used to be you needed Gary Powers in a U-2 to surveil the battlefield. And then you needed dedicated tactical reconnaissance aircraft. Now you throw a drone up. And the echelon at which those things would be decided, look, in Gary Powers, it's the White House making the decisions. And right now on the battlefield in Juliopol, some corporal is saying, hey, I need a look over there. And they throw up a drone, and there it is.
Yeah, it's amazing. And for all you listeners at Volya Radio, all you viewers here at Indications and Warnings on YouTube, the Buck Rogers stops here at Indications and Warnings and at Volya Radio. This is really where you're going to hear the conversation about the new technology on the battlefield. And I now, Chuck, want to go to Mary from Volya, who's been so patient. Mary, go ahead.
Thanks, Alan. Nice to hear you again, Chuck. I was wondering, speaking about the drones and all of that, and especially the autonomous drones, do you think at a certain point we're going to have to revisit the Geneva Convention and the established laws of war, to adjust them to drone warfare, and like when it comes to like surrendering soldiers and things of that sort? Because I see that quite a bit brought up of like what qualifies as surrendering, and what's a legitimate target for their drone. So do you think that that's something that we should look at a certain point, maybe after all of this is done, but just to establish them, kind of like what we did after World War II? Thanks, guys.
That's a great question, Mary. And I absolutely agree with you. But, in my experience, the Geneva Convention tends to be honored more in the breach than in the, actual recognition of the rules of warfare. Just yesterday, or actually it was maybe 18 hours ago, Russians desecrated the bodies of two Ukrainian soldiers on the battlefield in Heliopolis. They were observed by drones doing it. I don't think you're ever going to get Russia to come up to the standards that, and some of the standards are really pretty basic. If a guy throws down his weapon and puts up his hands, you can't shoot at him anymore. If a guy is laying there wounded and hors de combat, he's not a threat to you. You can't shoot him. But those are things that happen every day on the battlefield. And interestingly enough, Ukraine recorded the orders that were given by Russian command locally to their two goons to carry out that atrocity. But to get back to your point, I completely agree with you. So, the Geneva Convention was written, after World War I, and it was, I am a soldier with a bolt-action rifle, and I'm looking down my sight at a civilian. So now you've got a drone operator or even an autonomous drone that is looking at a person who is or is not a threat. What's the right and wrong there? Okay, so we all know what the right is. But how are you going to get someone like Russia who not only delights in killing civilians, but in the city of Kherson, it's a matter of policy that the Russians kill civilians there almost every day. They attack little old ladies in the street with their prams. They hit ambulances. They hit fire trucks. They hit hospitals. They hit aid stations. But all of this humming and hawing, Mary, I absolutely agree with you. That is the right thing to do, and we're getting to the point where revisions need to be made. But the application of the law is the real important thing.
The human safari, as it is called, that the Russians attempt to terrorize civilians with, it occurs not only in Kherson, but it is increasingly occurring in Nikopol, which is a frontline city. Nikopol used to be on the shores of the big reservoir that the Russians destroyed when they blew up the Kakhovka Dam. And across the water and across the marshland now, you can see the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. It's at Ernadar, the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. The Irish independent journalist Caelan Robertson recently went to Nikopol, and I would recommend his report from there and his report about the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant to any of our listeners or viewers here at Indications and Warnings. Really worth giving some attention to. Chuck, it's interesting. A lot of talk, obviously, about nuclear weapons because of the Israeli-American war against Iran. Proliferation of drones is probably going to become more significant in the coming century than proliferation of nuclear weapons. And there's no way to control that proliferation.
Yeah, and the technological barrier to entry is pretty low. I mean, you could literally go to a Walmart right now, and with a little chemistry on the side, you could make a really, dangerous weapon. And regarding the nuclear proliferation, I don't want to get into it too much, but the press seems to talk quite a lot about the enrichment of uranium, and they also ignore the fact that the Iranians are not simply enriching uranium; they are producing plutonium. And I won't go into as far than this, but look, Iran is a covertly armed nuclear power, right? They have nuclear weapons. That's it. Just get that into everyone's head. And if you know that, and one day Alan and I are going to do a nuclear proliferation show, So I'm not talking out of my hat. Listen, I will say this. I wrote the Weapons of Mass Destruction Annex to the National Counterterrorism Plan. So if I'm having fever dreams, I wrote them all down. And so, but you're right. The proliferation of arms is it's the root of all evil. But until we can solve our problems differently than Putin solves his, we're going to be facing this.
Well, it's also interesting because Hezbollah is being supplied with drones from Russia, and of course they are developing their own FPV drones, and it's becoming a problem for the Israeli military, frankly. And I guess the Israeli military will turn to Ukraine for help to defend themselves from these drone attacks.
Yeah, listen, they are the master practitioners, and we are definitely the Padawans here, right? They've got the sauce, and we don't. So listen and learn.
Exactly. Chuck, you put up a map today, and now I have to remind myself which one it was. It was from Julio Pole, right?
Yeah, you have to remind me too, Alan, because I do these really in the morning. And it seems like 2 days ago.
Just let me take a look and get it up in the nest, because Julio Pole is worth talking about. And here it is. You did this map 6 hours ago, Chuck.
Okay.
But the reason I want to bring it up is because it's partly about the shift in the number of engagements occurring along the zero line and where they are occurring. Now, the number of engagements, if you go to Ragnar Gudmundsson's dashboard, you will see that they are increasing. There are over 230, I think, yesterday. Still, the majority of engagements are around Pokrovsk. Kostyantynivka it hasn't yet boiled up to the Pokrovsk level of intensity, but Julio Pole has.
Yeah, and this is a pretty good map to circle back to the tactics we're talking about. You can see that the majority of these contacts are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15, almost 20 Russian contacts, and they occur west of the Hercher River and west of the TO401 highway. This is sort of the Crimea rope-a-dope, I would call it. This is where Ukraine will notice that so let's take an attacks that are to the northwest of Huliopole there, west of the TO401. So Ukraine has really good tactical intelligence and ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So every one of those little battle icons represents a Russian force that was brought together, concentrated, and then moved, towards the O series highway, the 081 344, moved towards there. And Ukraine picked the place and the pace of combat. So what the Ukrainians do in the Crimea rope-a-dope is they let them come towards the objective. And some of these guys went almost 10 kilometers from where they started, 6 miles. And by the time the Ukrainians make contact and engage them, these Russians are a long way from help or mercy, right? They are 6 miles out. And the great thing about these Russian attacks, and you can look at all of them, and the battle icons appear bigger than they are. But almost every one of these Russian contacts, they're not mutually supportable, right? And Russian doctrine says you hit with 3 units, one in the lead, one in direct support, and the third one trailing. So whoever succeeds the most, the reinforcements will go to that. But they never operate to their doctrine for a couple of reasons. They have very bad leadership. I probably know more of their military doctrine than the average field grade officer, and they don't have soldiers that can execute on this, right? And you think to be a soldier on the battlefield, you need how to know to shoot, move, and communicate, right? Just the moving part. They don't teach land navigation, right? So what the Russians can't do is converge on a target. They can't spread out their, so they're not concentrating in one place. They want to converge on the target, you know, more elegant attacks, more survivable tactics, and they just can't do it. So you look at these contacts, and virtually every one of these contact points, the Russians were defeated and driven back, right? So how, you know, this is the summer offensive right here, Alan, and it isn't looking good. So, and this also, if you are reading the significant events box up there, this is also where the atrocity was ordered and carried out. It was here. I don't know the exact point, but we know it was here.
That are committed against Ukrainians, it also underscores the fact that you cannot doubt what the Russians are about in Ukraine. It is genocide from beginning to end. This is also why the Russians have abducted at least 20,000 Ukrainian children. Frankly, tens of thousands more than the 20,000 that have actually been identified. The stories of each and every one of those 20,000 Ukrainian children can be entered as evidence in the International Criminal Court in order to convict Vladimir Putin of this war crime of genocide.
And you know, that could, why is the war still going? Well, it's because one guy wants it to continue to go. And why does he want it to continue to go? Well, this was his idea. He is literally in too deep to shrug off this entire endeavor. And if there's any good thing, listen, Vladimir Putin is never going to go surfing in Santa Barbara. He is never leaving Russia. And if he does, he's going to be, well, who knows? I don't know. He can go to Alaska and whoop it up, right? I would have arrested him at the airport. But it says a lot about the Russian character, Alan, to say that. Could you imagine if the My Lai massacre was played on American television and people enjoyed it? You've got a not just a problem with psychopathy, it's a public health problem if that's what your nation is digging.
Yeah, it is a public health problem. I was just laughing at some things happening in the background here. I'm usually guilty of muting myself, but I guess I was briefly muted. I have no idea at what point. But you know who we have back with us from Volya Radio right now is Will Teal. Will, go ahead.
So yeah, that point you made about mass mental health issues is an important one. I think if you look at the mass attacks on us here in Ukraine over the last couple of days, and then you look at Telegram and how they have been dancing in the streets over the videos, essentially. Well, you know, not in the streets, but they're rejoicing over the videos of the attacks in Kiev and Lviv and Ivano-Frankivsk and everywhere. This ties together with me that their Victory Day parade was such a damp squib from an international level and really humiliating to the population, because you did see some of that filter through in Telegram too, that you see that it's just an example. This is really not just Putin's war. This is the whole country's war, because they react to their humiliation with by when they have a counterstrike after storing up missiles, with a lot of open rejoicing of what should essentially be war crimes. And that really points to me of the really disgusting Moscow behavior that reinforces that this isn't Putin's war. This is the whole country of Russia's war. And I want to be able to make people remember this when in 6 months' time from now, when Ukraine is able to deliver 3 times the amount of deep strikes, Fedorov said today, 3 times the amount of deep strikes, they'll still be attacking military targets, but the shrieking and wailing from inside Russia, because they love to play the victim when things go bad for them, will, the information war that they're going to try to run on being victimhood, once this really does turn on them that way, I want to make sure everybody remembers that these are the folks who were cheering and clapping and dancing around with over war crimes and not over strategic target strikes.
Yeah, it's the psychopathy is endemic, and there is never a moral equivalency between a Russian target and a Ukrainian target. Alan and I were in Kharkiv. We saw an apartment building that was hit by 6 shaheeds. 6 on one building. We walked through the entire building. There wasn't even a toy gun in that building. In fact, it was heartbreaking to see the refrigerator art that was still on the refrigerators that kids had drawn. And Ukraine, first of all, they don't have the need to strike back at Russian population centers. They're also smart enough not to pay into that professional victimhood. But Ukraine is using its precious long-range precision strike munitions to hit strategic targets, right? Oil refineries. I don't want to say there's ball bearing plants, but the digital equivalents of that. And thank you, Will. With when we were there together, Will would we'd be at dinner and Will would show us some satellite photos, and then you ought to do this and this and this, and the next day, Will, what happened? They'd hit just what Will told them to hit.
Yeah, I swear, I think Budanov has a direct line to Will Teal.
It happened 3 nights in a row. It happened. So.
Yeah. I do want to call listeners' attention at Volya Radio to the first 2 tweets in the nest. These are fundraisers for WarDoggo, fundraisers for SBU Alpha, and you can become a monthly donor so that WarDoggo knows that he has your support 12 times a year and can count on it. It gives him the flexibility to react quickly and get really much needed equipment and help to the SBU Alpha units. So please, Volya listeners, do take a look up in the nest. We will also be posting under the recording of the live stream on YouTube the same links to WarDoggo's fundraisers. But if you can help today, you will be really helping to turn the tide against Russia. Almost as it is hard to believe, Chuck, but next February will be the 5th year milestone of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion. We're 4.5 years into this most recent chapter of the war.
Yeah, this was something that the Russians thought was going to take 4.5 days. And I'll just get back to WarDoggo. Alan and I have been able to meet him and talk to him. Truly a remarkable guy. What's also remarkable to me about this conflict is I don't think there's ever been, there always have been little old ladies knitting socks to go to the front, and I'll tell you, a pair of dry socks is not an inconsequential thing for a soldier, but you've got an opportunity to directly support one of the premier special warfare operations in the Ukrainian army. WarDoggo has a long track record. He has a logistical operation in place. SBU has frequently been on with Alan and I, and they will say what they need. They need night vision batteries. They need. I tell you what, it was very moving to me when they got on one night and they wanted 100 pairs of combat pants. They wanted pants, uniform items. Look, so this stuff goes right through. WarDoggo is in a position to assume a lot of this responsibility on himself, but he could sure use your help. And hey, you want to feel good about yourself? You want to, help these guys out? It's a great thing to do.
And so I do hope, and folks here at Indications and Warnings just got a look at WarDoggo's donation page at Give Butter. And I would encourage everyone, a lot of the viewers at Indications and Warnings on YouTube don't maintain a Twitter account, and I don't blame them. Twitter can be a bit of a sewer, can't it?
Yes, it is. I lived there, so yeah, I'd agree with that.
But I do encourage you, if you do have a Twitter account, follow WarDoggo. You can find his handle. I think it's Death Leopard. And WarDoggo is going to join us. This is a bit of a test. This simulcast on YouTube and on Volya Radio on Twitter. It's a test, so WarDoggo can join us with some SBU Alpha folks. The other thing I as long as Will is with us, we should talk a little bit about the training that the Ukrainian soldiers get, and this really goes to the point that Phil O'Brien made when he was speaking with us, Chuck, that you don't win a war with the army you enter the war with. And, he was suggesting probably Russia is on its fourth army, at least in the course of this war. Ukraine is probably on its third, maybe. But at the same time, Ukraine is fielding its most experienced and best trained force, and probably best equipped force in the 4.5 years of this war, wouldn't you say?
I would say, and arguably, Russia is down to its worst equipped and worst trained force. And I'll give you an example. When Alan and I were in Kramatorsk, we met two young men who were drone operators and electronic warfare guys. Both of them had master's degrees, and both of them were serving in the Ukrainian army as privates, not as officers, as privates. And just amazingly intelligent, thoughtful guys. And it just occurred to me that, look, if this is some of this is some of the mean, this is the median sort of soldier that is fighting for his country in Ukraine. There has constantly been this problem for Russia, and that their training and their combat effectiveness has been on a ever steepening downward curve. And one of the reasons that is that these rough numbers are pretty rough, but there are somewhere between 400 and 600,000 Russian combatants in the Ukrainian theater at any one time. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. But if you pick the lower end of that estimate, say 400,000 Russian troops engaged in combat in Ukraine at any time, They lose 360,000 of those troops a year. So virtually every year, it doesn't mean that everybody who entered Ukraine is dead, but it does mean that the number equal to that force that entered, they have become casualties. And this is why they are left with nothing better than small unit infiltrations. And again, there's nothing easier for a soldier to do on the battlefield than attack. That's the easiest thing there is. The hardest thing to do is get in behind the enemy lines, commit a mission, and get out. That takes the highest level of training. The next highest level of training is to get bunted, like in the Battle of the Bulge, pull back, pull together, and then engage the enemy. That's the hardest thing to do. And Alan, I don't think Russia is capable of doing that anymore. They showed us how badly they handled the Kherson offensive, the Sumy offensive, and the Kharkiv offensive, where in the Kharkiv offensive, they fell back 60 kilometers in one day. So the future could look pretty bright, actually.
Well, it could, and we'll see where we get to by the end of the summer, the beginning of the fall. But it's quite clear the Russian summer offensive has stalled, and it's springtime. So I'm going to go back to Will, but I also want to cue Will. One of the things I did want to talk about is Ukrainian training. It's been extended by a few days, primarily to help Ukrainian soldiers come up with tactics to defend themselves from Russian drone attacks. Shotguns actually play a role here. Will had an opportunity to spend some time with our friend from Canada, Kevin Leach, who is conducting some of the training of Ukrainian soldiers. Will, what can you tell us about that?
Well, it goes right to your previous point about being on the 3rd and 4th armies, because I agree with Phillips O'Brien when you were having the discussion with him about that, in that Russia probably is on its 4th army due to attrition. Ukraine is probably on its 3rd army due to reformation, right? Because they've gone through these iterations of introductions of new weapons and tactics. But the survivability of the Ukrainian military is far, far greater, proven by multiple different observers. And a lot of that has to do with, just the care, the command and control care, but definitely the training that they're getting too, because it is quite easy. It's, I guess, easy to execute, saying just go that way with a gun and try to attack somebody, especially if you're being pressed from behind with a bullet coming at you if you don't keep moving forward on the Russian side. But being able to, shoot, move, and communicate inside defensive positions and moving to other defensive positions with supporting fire is the way you're going to survive these engagements while you slowly withdraw if you have to give up territory. And that's the kind of things that they're teaching these folks. Right? So Ukraine has gone from a system where they've been sending a lot of people overseas for basic training, and now they've indicated that they're going to keep all training of Ukrainian soldiers inside Ukraine. I actually really applaud that, just on an efficiency basis. And when I was talking to Kevin Leach about it, he agreed with what I have been saying for a couple of years, that the infrastructure of NATO training, the organization that you put together, a training plan, the way you, it's like all adult education in the world is, watch me demonstrate this, then you're going to walk through it, then you're going to be able to practice it and demonstrate it to competency. That training methodology is something that came out of, I'm going to say, the U.S. Army, but all NATO armies use it, right? and they all know that when they're going to train 5,000 people, that they need a mess hall of this big, they need training places of this big, they're going to need this many cadre, the organization and logistics, the machine behind training people of NATO is excellent. And you could take people from Australia or Belgium or Germany or America and put those cadre in there, and they could help organize all that training. But clearly, the resounding results that have come back from training Ukrainian soldiers is that the expertise needs to come from NCOs coming off the front line. And that would be the ideal thing to do, is marry up the NATO style training delivery with the Ukrainian expertise that you could pull out of the line. And those trainers that would come off the line would obviously need a break anyway. So it would be an ideal way to start rotating people: training assignment, then rest assignment, then combat assignment, then training assignment, then rest assignment, then combat. They really need to industrialize this inside Ukraine. It's hampered a little bit by the fact that the units are essentially doing their training themselves, right? There's no one big basic training unit. There aren't big training organizations, battalions inside Ukraine, and that kind of hurts them in consistency, but it definitely means that the guys that they're training are meeting their needs on that unit, I guess, the same way that their support is coming in. But the training they're getting here on the ground, and I hope they use the folks like Kevin Leach that are on the ground here, and Yvonne and Alexandra, his daughter, who are doing superb shotgun training for drones, because some of the basic training that you get on how to fire a rifle, and how do you make sure you don't jam a rifle, and you're not putting the barrel in the dirt and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't change worldwide, but the expertise on how you would shoot, move, and communicate on this battlefield is definitely needs to be taught by Ukrainian folks who've served there. So I still think there's a real capability of marrying up the scope and capacity of NATO delivery with expertise from Ukraine here inside Ukraine. But what it's going to take is some bravery, right? If you ask all the Australian soldiers who are serving in Operation Kudu, would they come serve in Ukraine rather than serve inside the United Kingdom? I'll bet you to a person, every one of those people would say, yes, we will. I mean, I'd do it myself, right? Kevin Leach was saying after he found out that I could still shoot a rifle, that I could, would I come work for him for a year for free? And I said, well, I'd consider it. But he is trying to gear up his organization as Ukraine moves into we're going to train everybody in Ukraine mode to try to get that up and functioning, to do it at scale bigger, because we've known Kevin's Sabre unit since 2022 when I first interviewed him. And he's doing excellent work. The folks that he's got there, the NCOs from Georgia and the United States and other places, Ukrainians, a real mixed bag, are all superb, good trainers. And I think, and the cost that he could do it for, he could train 5,000 soldiers for something like $2 million a year, and that you just couldn't touch that in our countries. And I really think that I hope when Fedorov is looking through the other things they're doing to maintain soldiers, to make it more popular to be able to join, get volunteers in, and help convince them of survivability, that he embraces folks like Kevin Leach's organization and Yvonne and Alexandra's organization. There are a lot of people doing shotgun training these days here, Alan, not just the folks we support. There's a lot of people that have realized that the way to make sure you can last line of defense against any type of drone is to have a shotgun and know how to use it, and to make sure that you're capable of using it in the environment where you're going to be at, inside trenches and stuff. And that's some of the real practical training that they give. And I was really just ecstatic to be able to do both of those days of training with these people that we know here. So you can speak about it with some confidence. You know, I shout down the radio 5 days a week, and sound pretty confident, but it's nice to be able to come over and see that, you know, you're not talking garbage, that it really would work if they scale it up.
You know, the other thing I would say, and, you know, Chuck can certainly speak to this from the background of his training, but it's simply another skill for a Ukrainian soldier. You know, one of the things I've noticed, and this is anecdotal, but whenever you see a Ukrainian drone tracking and taking out a Russian soldier, you know, sometimes those soldiers just accept their fate. Other times they throw sticks and stones at the drone. You know, yeah, some of them will take their rifles and try to shoot the drone out of the air, but the Ukrainians are training their soldiers to do that, and they are also supplying their soldiers with a type of ammunition that is interchangeable with the weapon they are issued. It's a type of ammunition that is designed to take that drone out of the air. So, I mean, it's just another skill. It goes to shoot, move, and communicate. In this case, on the new battlefield that has been transformed by drones.
Yeah, and just like you were saying, Will, it's you know, and I actually feel guilty that many times, in fact, that I'm not over there with Kevin, and I'm going to do that at some point. But you were talking about, you know, the economy of scale, and, you know, just simply the expense and dynamics of moving 1,000 soldiers into France to train with a foreign legion. And believe me, those are good guys, good trainers. You get your money's worth out of it. But I do agree with you that, you know, it isn't just the technological advances that are happening month by month here, but also just as you're saying, you know, and it's interesting to me that the shotgun didn't really start showing up until the last 10 months ago, when it was completely viable the entire time. And although this would sound crazy, you know, in sort of in my day and what I used to do, I mean, we actually did used to train with shotguns, but I was shooting at doorknobs, you know. But now you give me a group of soldiers and I would spend, you know, X amount of time on the rifle range shooting at 300 meters. And then I would carve out time, like, you guys need 2 weeks shooting skeet, every one of you, trap and skeet. And right. So there's going to be another leap here. There's going to be another leap. And we're going to see other anti-drone, kinetic, hard kill anti-drone technology that is delivered again to the squad level where these guys are. And this war is unique in its dynamics too, because it's essentially defensive.
Yeah. It's also fascinating that in this age of new technology on the battlefield, that something as ancient as a shotgun is a remedy for the most advanced technology on the battlefield. Actually, there are now drones outfitted with shotguns to go into drone-on-drone aerial combat. And I've seen the Ukrainian drones armed with shotguns taking out some of those Russian drones, especially the reconnaissance drones that the Russians have up there, and the loitering munitions drones. You know, questions come from all over. Here is a question from our good friend Martin Zelig from Canada. Alan, please ask Chuck to comment on this message I received from a friend in Europe today. And here is that comment. War has long ceased being a tool for the Kremlin. It is their raison d'etre, their reason for being. Europe must finally understand that only an adequate response can stop aggression. A response from Europe is required. There is no other way. I think Europe has gotten that message, Chuck.
Yeah, I think it has as well. And it, it unfortunately, it truly is sort of the raison d'etre. And so we've got the era of Putin, but it sits on the Soviet era, where again, the base philosophy, Marxist Leninism, required starting brush fires around the world, right? It was the purpose to bring communism to the world, and as Orthodox Marxists, they embraced the fact that there is no other legitimate means of political change except violence. Violence was the only legitimate means of political change. So, the Soviet Union falls away, but that sort of pyromania, political pyromania, remains very close to the Russian heart. So, let's just look at the sort of last end of here in the Putin era, right? So they attacked Georgia, they attacked Moldova, they attacked Chechnya twice, they invaded Ukraine, they got into the Syrian civil war, and now they're carrying on in Africa. So this kind of gets down to, and Alan and I were talking this about during the battle, going up to the Battle of Bakhmut and beforehand, that the strategic aim of Ukraine must be the defeat of the Russian army. You've got to take the hatchet out of Putin's hands. You've got to make it that he can't use that hatchet for the next 10 years, right? You're not going to reform him politically. He's not going to come to Jesus. You've got to make sure that his army is so gut shot and effed up that they can't do this stuff anymore. And Alan, in terms of their combat effectiveness, we're getting pretty close to that, I think. And I'm right for that glorious day when they can't even stage a parade. Oh, wait a minute. That already happened.
Or if they want to stage a parade, they need a parade permit from Ukraine to do it.
Yeah.
So we are, Chuck, if we can do this, we're going to close down the live stream in 23 minutes. So at the bottom of the hour, on the half hour here, I want to thank everyone who's both listening on Volya Radio and watching on Indications and Warnings over on YouTube. Thank you for watching, listening, and for all of your questions. And please repost the live stream while we have another 20 minutes to go. Chuck, we would be remiss if we didn't go to the west of Orkiev and take a look at what the Ukrainians may be able to do out of Kamiansky, because a couple of shows ago on Indications and Warnings, you suggested that it was here that if there was any place on the zero line, it was here you might expect the Ukrainians to surprise the Russians. So this is a map, as I say, to the west of Orkiev, and you put this map up on the 13th of May, so just yesterday.
Yeah. So what we've got going here, and good thing, folks, you can go to live view map and blow this area up. So we're looking at this map goes from Orkiev, which is to the east of Huliopol, where the Russians, had all of their attacks blunted today. But then it goes, when you're looking to Kamiansky and to the west of it, and you see that swamp that all used to be a massive reservoir. And as Alan said, in fact, that the reservoir went on for 100 miles, and it's now all swamp. And this came after the Russians blew up the dams at Novo Harkova. Anyway, what's going on there is that this again has been one of those quieter sections for the Russians. They spent a lot of time building a pretty strong defensive network that is to the south of this map. The Servivov line. They built tank traps and anti-tank ditches, interlocking hard points with interlocking fields of fire, thousands upon thousands of dragon teeth and tetrahedrons, which are cement pyramids that are difficult for a tracked vehicle to get over. But there's a couple of miscalculations there. The grift in the Russian system meant that the dragon's teeth that were delivered were just cast concrete, and they didn't have the rebar in them. And there's been a couple of films showing a Ukrainian tank. They got one of these dragon's teeth and put it in a parking lot, and because it's not reinforced, the tank goes right over it. But again, as we mentioned, the Russians are putting most of their effort into the east and probably banking a little bit too much on what they think is their strong defensive position there. But as Alan and I were talking about the other night, if you don't have troops manning a defensive line, i.e. the Maginot line, if you don't have troops in it, it's just a modern art exhibition, right? It is not a defensive position if there aren't people in the position, and I'll add one more thing, and are willing and or capable of fighting. So there is an opportunity that I'm sure the Ukrainian high command can judge much better than I can, but they're taking a hard look at this. And the more Russia pulls its troops out of Kherson, out of the salient between Kamiansky and Orkhiv, there's going to be more and more of an opportunity there as well. And what compels the Russians to do these idiotic things are they got a little trembling, puffy-faced guy, not talking about me, I'm big, but he's in the Kremlin and he wants to hear that you've taken cities. And he doesn't care if it takes 150,000 casualties in Bakhmut or 250,000 casualties in Pokrovsk. So the Kamiansky to Orkhiv salient, I started reposting recently, and we're going to keep an eye on this because I just have a hunch. One thing I'd also like to point out is if you look at the topographic map there and you go just to the north and west of Orkhiv, there is some terrain there. There are bluffs and, cliffs and hills, and that is a very natural high point. I posted a video the other day of forces in that area, and someone asked, wow, where's that? Right. So it's northwest of Kharkiv, because most of Ukraine is kind of flat and rolling and beautiful, with the exception of the Carpathians, which Alan and I never get to go to because they're nice.
Yeah, but we have seen pictures. So the other interesting thing while we are looking at this map to the west of Orkhiv, those east-west roads in occupied Ukraine, it's to the south of those that eventually you reach the M14. So in other words, the better tactical positions that the Ukrainians can claim between Kamiansky and Orkhiv, the closer they are to that M14, it really helps them keep the M14 under fire control, right?
Yeah, and the immediate goals down south there are the town of Tokmak, which is, I don't know, 30, 40 kilometers south, And then beyond that is Melitopol. And interestingly enough, we talk about the defensive line there. The area around Tokmak and Melitopol is one of the most dense concentrations of Ukrainian partisans, right? And I mean, if you are a Russian soldier, put it in a sentry box at night, you're going to wake up dead because somebody's going to get you. And that in itself, that sort of diversion, it forces resources to be put into security there. It causes the local forces to pull their horns in a little bit for force protection, and that gives the partisans more ability to operate. And, you know, the principal goal of a partisan is essentially intelligence gathering. Sabotage is great, especially if you're linked up with a deeply inserted special operations force. But the best thing a partisan can do is give you timely intelligence. And I think Alan and I will do a partisan show coming up here too, I think.
Yeah, it's hard to get information from occupied Ukraine, but from time to time, information leaks out, and of course, you know, Budanov and others in the special operation forces of Ukraine are actually in pretty constant communication with partisans in occupied Ukraine. And, you know, I don't want to speculate about what occupation has been like. It's been certainly a very long occupation at this point, over 4.5 years for lots of Ukrainians, over 4.5 years, for example, Ukrainians in Donetsk city, which was once quite a major and beautiful and elegant Ukrainian city with a great sports stadium. It's in a state of disrepair that will take it years to recover from. You know, Chuck, one of the things that we were tracking is the 1,000 for 1,000 prisoner exchange that Donald Trump personally guaranteed would happen. And this was part of the permission that Ukraine granted Putin to hold his parade in Red Square. Now, to the best of my knowledge, that exchange has not yet occurred. Although Ukrainian sources say it will occur, it hasn't occurred yet. And I think the longer the time passes without the exchange, the more I doubt that it will actually happen at all.
Yeah, there's, you know, there is this haunting question as to what happened to those guys, right? And it isn't just fear-mongering. As we remember from the Donetsk massacre of prisoners of war, where the Russians literally called in an artillery strike on the prisoner of war camp. And I'm happy to report, and please go back to my Kyiv Post reporting, and you can see what happened to the Russian commandant of that camp. And karma was served up in a nice big cold slice for that guy. But again, these are matters of policy for the Russians. These aren't accidents. This wasn't simply a case of neglect. You know, someone decided we're gonna kill 100 of these guys tonight. So yeah. The other thing I'll say is, look, this war is no longer winnable by Russia. They're not going to win it. They're not going to come back in the fourth quarter and turn this around. And I think we're in the fourth quarter, you know. But now there's the very real possibility that not only will Russia not win, they're looking at a defeat. And I'm encouraged by General Budanov when responding to Vladimir Putin's post-parade speech saying he can foresee the end of the war. General Budanov in so many wars said, I don't think so, dude. I don't foresee the end of this, which is exactly what we need. Ukraine is Ukraine. Crimea is Ukraine.
Of course, the other thing about the prisoner exchange, we've seen the Ukrainian prisoners coming home to Ukraine in absolutely horrible condition, emaciated, victims of torture. And in many, many cases, some of those returned prisoners, while home again in Ukraine, have been so harmed by their captivity in Russia that that they succumb. They die weeks and months after their return. So it's absolutely urgent that these 1,000 Ukrainian prisoners come home. You know, Russia refuses to release Ukrainian soldiers who defended the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. So they have been captive now for basically 4.5 years, many of them.
Yeah, and you know it's a Russian legacy. You know, they literally, the prisoners that they took at Stalingrad were literally marched east until they all died. Right? No food, no water, inadequate clothing, no rest stops. Just march everybody until everybody's dead, and that's their legacy. And that, as Alan said, look, there's no reason that these guys should be returned starved to death with chronic medical care, injuries of torture. And, you know, Ukraine does not return like for like. The Russian prisoners who are returned are in good health. They've been fed, they've been clothed adequately, they've been given medical care. And I'm not suggesting anything less for the, you know, to treat Russian prisoners of war. And this also works against the Russians. If you know that you are going to be maltreated as a prisoner of war and likely die in the tender care of the Russian opponent, then it's pretty much that you fight to the death. And again, this is everything that Russia does recoils upon itself.
Well, there is some new news about the prisoner exchange. I can't, unfortunately, get to it and open it and read it, but it's possible one of our listeners will come up and help me out with that. The legacy of Russia in war, both on the battlefield and how they treat captive opponents in war. You know, I think that the number of Nazi prisoners who were taken by Russia in the Second World War, those who eventually returned to Germany numbered in the hundreds, from tens of thousands of Germans taken captive by the Soviets.
Yeah, and there were German prisoners that were held for decades. Yeah, again, this is, I don't go back to the root of all evil, you know, the Marxist legacies, but this is, you know, this is what happened.
Yeah.
This is what happened in the Russian Civil War. It's what happened to German prisoners in World War I. It's what happened to German prisoners in World War II. Prisoners taken by Russian proxies in the Korean and Vietnam War. We all know how those prisoners were treated. So this is, you know, this is their standard operating procedure.
Well, we have James Healy joining
They
us.
also sent they also sent their own returned prisoners from Nazi Germany into the Gulag system.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely, Will. Absolutely.
Yeah. And James Healy has some news about the prisoner exchange here on Volya Radio. James, go ahead.
Yes. Well, you know, President Zelensky is commenting on this, and he says, our contacts with the American side regarding guarantees for the implementation of the arrangements reached recently and announced by the president are ongoing. The prisoner exchange, 1,000 for 1,000, is being prepared and must take place. The Americans assumed responsibility. I don't believe that for a second that was Trump. Sorry. Anyways, for these guarantees, Ukraine's coordination headquarters has handed over the list for the 1,000 POWs to the Russian side. there was American mediation in reaching this arrangement on the exchange, and accordingly, we expect the American side to play an active role in ensuring its fulfillment.
Yeah, James, you said the quiet part out loud there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I keep wondering when Washington is going to realize that Putin is playing them for monkeys, right? Whatever he says, it doesn't happen. Whatever he agrees to, it doesn't happen. He asks for a ceasefire during which he can hold his parade. I reported there were at least 1,000 Russian initiated ceasefire violations on the zero line in Ukraine, like anyone would have expected. But to pay back the Ukrainian courtesy, he launched this last drone attack was the biggest one of the war. 1,500 drones and whatever it was, 75 ballistic missiles. I don't know. I have to check, but it was the biggest attack of the war. So, that's what you're going to get back.
It's well after 1 a.m. in the morning now in Ukraine. And so I'm actually wondering, we have some folks here on Volya Radio in Ukraine. Any expectations of what might be in store overnight? I haven't seen any reports, but maybe you have seen some reports, Will, or?
I have not. I haven't seen any reports and no alerts of things incoming from Russia our direction. They might be taking a breather after those 2 days, but there are a lot of drones heading out of Ukraine into Russia. Industrial targets, the same ones you'd know up through Bryansk, up through toward Voronezh, and in about 4 or 5 hours, we'd expect to see some of those reach their targets, and we'll know what they're after tonight.
And these are hundreds of Ukrainian drones on their way to strike industrial and military targets inside Russia and probably inside occupied Ukraine as well. Look, we are coming to the end of this live stream. I hope that viewers and listeners thought everything came off okay. I said before it started, it's a bit like going on an Apollo mission. I was hoping it wouldn't be Apollo 13. I don't think it has been. And I hope it's been engaging. I certainly think we got some great questions, both from Volya listeners and from viewers over at the Indications and Warnings YouTube channel. I also hope that some of you found your way to help WarDoggo tonight, because your donations now actually are coming at a time where you are helping Ukraine turn the tide against Russia. This is going to be a summer of tipping points, and so let's tip the Russians out of Ukraine just as quickly as we possibly can. I think this is going to be a tipping point summer, don't you, Chuck?
I really do, and I just like to bring it back to WarDoggo for a second. It's so amazing to me that you can support a single unit. We've done fundraisers for Alpha. We've done some fundraisers for Omega, which is their counterpart unit within the National Guard. These are their tier 1 operators, and it's very moving to me how modest their asks are. Gathering money so they can get a couple of used trucks, right? And you take a civilian vehicle, even if it's a 4-wheel drive, and you subject it to combat use, it's really an expendable commodity, folks. It's only going to last 10 or 15 weeks. out there, and they are used for the most important things. Look, they're used for medical evacuations. They're used for, transportation of critical logistics. And it's such an easy thing to do. And, please do. We encourage you. Alan and I do it. We've met all the operators here. It's a great way to show your support.
It sure is. And those links can be found in the video description over on YouTube at the Indications and Warnings channel. And you can find the tweets here on Twitter on Volya Radio. I want to remind everyone that Volya Radio has a great archive of broadcasts that you can find on Spotify. One of the shows that you will want to look for is Understanding Genocide. This, I think, is probably one of the most important broadcasts that Volya Radio has continued every single week, practically. But there are now dozens of broadcasts specifically about genocide and how Russians are committing it in Ukraine, what the genocide laws and conventions are and how they can be applied. There will be an Understanding Genocide broadcast tonight on Volya Radio here at Twitter, beginning in about 90 minutes. So at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Nancy, Gina, and Prince will be talking once again about genocide in Ukraine. So I encourage all of our viewers at Indications and Warnings, if you can't listen tonight to Volya Radio, go to Spotify and specifically look for the Understanding Genocide broadcasts. For everyone listening with us here on Twitter, come back in 90 minutes for a broadcast that I actually have made a commitment to listen to every single week, unless for some reason I can't tune in. Chuck, this has been a great experiment, and I think, we have circled the moon. We didn't get abandoned on the dark side, and we are on our way home.
And thank you, Thomas, and thanks everyone for behind the scenes who really made this work. Alan and I really, this is the money shot for us. We love to take the questions from the audience. So please do join us. And I'll also plug, go to YouTube, check Indications and Warnings. Thomas has loaded all of the episodes back there. It's amazing how, we'll talk about things, and things in this war keep repeating. We're talking about the same battlefields and the evolving tactics. So please do join us there, and look forward to us doing this again really soon. Alan and I hope this is going to become the way we do things in the future.
I hope so too. It works for me. I hope it works for all of our listeners and viewers. And when you go to Indications and Warnings on YouTube, take a look back for some of your favorite episodes. For example, if you want to hear a lot about General Budanov, go back and listen to the episode we did about Vovchansk when he was involved in that particular action by Ukraine. So again, I want to thank everyone, and this is where Chuck and I look forward to saying and hearing all of you join us in saying Slava Ukraini.
Heroam Slava. Good night, everybody.
Heroam
Thanks
Slava.
so much.
See you.
See you, Will.
Slava.
Good talking to you guys. Night, everybody.
Night.